you see a lot of tragedy. It's just systemic in your job description, right? Murders and robberies and rapes and frauds, and you see a lot of sad stuff. That having been said, to me, the saddest case I ever had a role in was the so-called Texas cadet murders, and it's tragic. I mean, just so sad. My client was a guy named David Graham. David was a student at Mansfield High School. He was in love with another high school senior named Diane Zamora. They were in love. They were always going to be together. They were going, they would be together forever. Typical high school, conclusion. David was a very qualified, very smart kid, as was Diane. David got accepted into the Naval Academy. David got accepted into the Air Force Academy. Diane got into the Naval Academy. I guess in the spring of his senior year, David had a track meet, I think in Lubbock, where he had some sort of relationship with a girl by the name of Adrienne Jones. Diane found out about it, this love triangle, and Diane decided that the only way David could make it right was for them to go kill. It's just bloody awful for them to go kill Adrienne Jones. The facts at trial showed that David called Adrienne Jones. She snuck out of the house. She was 16 years old. She snuck out of the house, got in David's car. Diane was hiding in the back of David's car. They drove out to Joe Pool Lake, which is really around the corner from here. She got out of the car. She thought that Adrienne Jones thought that she and David were going to have a makeout session or whatever. And she was struck from behind with a weight, and then she was shot, and she was left to die. Just broke your heart.
And she was struck from behind by a weight by Diane, or?
Correct.
And then David shot her.
That's correct. That's what the evidence showed.
And you were representing David?
I was representing David, and the death penalty was on the table for both of them. The state, really at the request of the Jones family, wanted the death penalty taken off the table. The Jones family, I mean, they were, handled that thing with as much class and decency as anybody could under those circumstances. So Diane went to trial first, got convicted. We went to trial second. We suffered the same fate, a conviction. David got life. That was in 1995, I think. So he's still in prison. I think has another, well, that was 30 years ago. I think he's got to do 40 before he's parole eligible. So he spent his entire adult life in prison.
So I want to ask a few more questions as it pertains to this case, because it has all of the makings. I mean, it legit actually was a Lifetime movie. So I want to play this Crime Watch clip and then kind of dig into a couple more questions about this specific case. So obviously this is a longer clip that we're not going to go through, but it seems like she's kind of revisiting this and discussing her true nature, I guess, and intentions. But
so in this case, did the people involved try to hide like what they did, or do they confess, or like how do you find the truth in something like this?
Well, in this situation, David went off to the Air Force. Actually, to back up, Tommy, in this situation, a third person, another student at Mansfield High, was charged for killing Adrienne. He was eventually released, but they suspected this third person of having killed Adrienne. David went off to the Air Force Academy. Diane went off to the Naval Academy. I don't think they would have ever been caught, except for one evening, Diane Zamora was in her dorm with her classmates or pledge mates or whatever at the Naval Academy, and these girls were discussing whose boyfriend loved them more. And she said, well, my boyfriend loves me more. And they said, well, how do you know? And she said, because my boyfriend killed another woman for me. And following the honor code at the Naval Academy, her pledge mates, or whatever you call them, reported that to the Naval Academy. Authorities came and arrested Diane, and then Diane made a statement and confessed, and then they fell in on David at the Air Force Academy. And David, again, for the first time in my career, I've never had a client sit down and type his own single-spaced confession, but David did just that. I think it was a 16-page single-spaced confession.
So he essentially said, like, this is what happened. This
Yeah.
is what I did.
He-
Wait,
detailed
why
it.
did he do that? Just because it was clear that it was they were guilty? I mean, like
I believed that, and I still believe that the reason David confessed and took responsibility for it was to save Diane, right? To paint her as lesser involved than she was. I will always believe that none of this would have ever happened but for Diane Zamora saying, we need to kill her. The only way we're going to make this right is for us to go kill that girl. That it would have never happened but for Diane.
wow. And what's crazy too is that potentially they wouldn't have get caught. They wouldn't have got caught if it wasn't for that like sorority conversation.
That's right.
And how was that third person who was originally accused for the murder? Like, what was the evidence or any kind of insinuation that it was him?
I think the evidence showed that this third person, and I don't want to mention his name because he was falsely accused, and the last thing I want to do is dredge that horrible experience up for him. But I think the evidence showed that he had kind of an obsession, or kind of had a crush on Adrian Jones, and made some calls, and said some awkward things, and was at the funeral and acting a little off, and for whatever reason they believed he was responsible for it.
So a false accusation was absolved by really like a gossip tea session that was confirmed by a confession, right?
Yeah, they both confessed. David's confession, I think, put more on himself than the facts showed. I think Diane was at least as responsible for the death, but it didn't matter. I mean, the whole tragedy, the whole point is that this was a crime, a tragedy that should have never happened. There was no reason in the world for this to have occurred. It changed the lives of at least 3 families forever. David was probably 19, maybe 20 years old at the time that I defended him. That was 30 years ago, so he's now, pushing 50. And he's been in prison his whole adult life. Probably will die there, even though he'll be eligible for parole in a few years. And the Jones family, for God's sakes, they lost a daughter. They can never get that back. I think, but in their own way, they were 2 kind of awkward kids. That is David. I mean, he was in the reserve Air Force, ROTC in high school, and band member. I mean, kind of they weren't. They didn't sit at the cool kids table, right? They just didn't. And Diane was a pretty girl, but socially she might have been a bit more of a butterfly. But these were 2 awkward kids who had greatness in their grasp, and the future that they had longed for their entire life in their grasp. And in the middle of it, this problem was created, it's just these lives were destroyed over nothing. For whatever it's worth, at Diane's trial, the state's theory was that David had sex with Adrian Jones, and that's why Diane insisted on them killing. At David's trial, the state changed their theory and said, no, they didn't have sex, but Diane thought they had sex. It doesn't really matter. The point of my carp is it was just so completely unavoidable, unnecessary, and tragic. I've just never seen anything like it.
That's, pretty insane when it comes to the age that they were at when they committed this crime. They were both 17, 18, or
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they were tried as adults anyways, and they got life. And again, my questions, I'm going to be the guy who speaks for the dumb guys and asks the dumb questions because I am genuinely curious and I don't understand how this works, or maybe I've never been thoroughly explained. So when someone's 18, something like this happens, and they get sentenced to life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be in jail their entire life. It means, like you said, you have to be there for 30 years or 40 years to get parole.
It changes with the times, but back about that time, they in Texas, if you got life and there was an affirmative finding that a deadly weapon was used, you had to do 40 calendar years before you were eligible for parole. So he had to, and that was in 1995 or 1996. So that was 30 years ago. So he won't be eligible for parole until he does 40 years, and so that's another 10 years.
And
Now, to interrupt,
Yeah.
when I was a younger lawyer, life in the Texas state prison system, you were out in 6 or 7 years. Prisons were so overcrowded at the time; they were forcing people out. We no longer have horrible conditions that still exist within the Texas prison system, but overcrowding is not like it was then. And so, regardless, under the statutes now, you'll have to do 40 calendar before you're eligible for parole.
And did they get charged with capital murder?
They did get charged with capital murder, which is a murder in this case that occurred during the course of a kidnapping. The state's theory was that when David seduced her to get in his car, it was without her effective consent, and then once she was trying to run away, by grabbing her and restraining her, that was a kidnapping. But as I mentioned, the Jones family, who had great compassion, probably more compassion than I would have under the circumstances, they wanted the death penalty taken off the table because their position was, look, we've already lost our daughter. We don't want anyone else to lose, their child. If in order for a jury to assess the death penalty, there would have to be a showing that there were, future dangerousness and all that, and the crime was particularly heinous, and all the factors that a jury considers in determining whether or not the death penalty is appropriate. Would they have gotten death in this case? I don't know, because future dangerousness would have been hard to show, and it would have been a difficult case for the state. Not impossible, but certainly difficult for them to obtain the death penalty just based upon this one horrible, tragic accident. So I don't know if the state would have gotten or obtained the death penalty or not, but by the Jones family asking the prosecutors to not pursue the death penalty, it took it off the